The trick is, right, try this phrase on for size, is there is no self-sufficient way to be self-indulgent. Hello and welcome to Thinking Out Loud. I'm your co-host, Nathan Rittenhouse.
And I'm your co-host, Cameron McAllister.
And today we're going to talk about Goblin Mode, which is a word that I didn't even know existed, or a phrase, I guess, not a word, phrase that I didn't even know existed until today when it was announced that that is the Oxford Dictionary word of the year, Goblin Mode. Now, I mean, the Oxford Dictionary word of the year is a little bit of a strange thing to me. First of all, I don't know, something seems counterintuitive to me about having people vote on something that's based on a dictionary. So it seems like the dictionary should be a standard that isn't a democratically elected process. But anyway, nevertheless, there have been other words in the past. Vax was one a year or two ago. Another one that made the headlines in Christian circles is that in 2016, the word post truth was the Oxford word of the year. So you can scroll back through those and see. I guess it, to some degree, it does sort of give us a global snapshot of the global mood, perhaps. And so there you have it, Goblin Mode. Cameron, explain it to us. Give us your thoughts.
Well, wasn't the democratic process new? They haven't done that in the past, right? Where they've
Okay,
had
yeah, I'm
people
not
vote.
sure.
That's new. But also, so the other two words that phrases that Goblin Mode was competing with, the one was metaverse, and then the
Mhm.
other was hashtag I stand with, which I
Right.
think probably the most popular instantiation of that was hashtag I stand with Ukraine.
Mhm.
But Goblin Mode won by a factor of 96% or something like that with the public vote. So just, yeah, an outrageous landslide victory. Yeah,
So
one of
even
my
if you haven't heard the word or don't really care about it, it's worth us talking about it because it is significantly popular.
I hadn't heard, so I'll be honest, I had not heard the phrase Goblin Mode. But so let's define it real quickly, just in
D-
case some of our listeners are in that same position and they haven't heard it. Hey, Nathan, I want your definition of Goblin Mode. I want to hear how
Oh,
you would define this.
oh no, I'm going to use the actual one here.
Oh,
So
you're just gonna read it. Oh, no fun.
so goblin mode, a slang term often used in the expression quote in goblin mode or to quote to go goblin mode, is a type of behavior. And see, this is British because behavior has a U in it, so it's special.
Behavior.
Is a type of behavior which is unapologetically self-indulgent, lazy, sloven, greedy, typically in a way that rejects social norms or expectations. Man, I'm getting my words mixed up there. Blah, 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 blah. Or expectations. So yeah,
Sound
basically
familiar, folks?
it's not to yeah, that's my goblin gibberish. Um, yeah, unapologetically self-indulgent, lazy, greedy in a way that rejects social norms or expectations. I think from what I was seeing though, it wasn't necessarily like this is, oh, we're going to go start a riot and burn things down in the city. It was more like I'm going to eat my supper in bed and not care if I
Right.
get crumbs on my bed sheets. So,
Oh, yeah, not at all. Yeah, goblin can be misleading in the sense that somebody thinks of adversarial or chaotic behavior. That's not what it's
yeah, so you're
talking
mischievously
about.
crossing the boundaries of
No,
convention.
you're a slob.
Oh, yeah, okay, there you go.
But
Because you want to
yeah,
be and you're not apologizing for it.
yeah, I mean, I read one instance where, boy, do we sound old as we discuss. Yes, instances of goblin mode that strike me as particularly relevant here. But there was one, yeah, prime goblin mode is waking up at 3 a.m., staggering out of bed in your pajamas, your hair all disheveled, making yourself some random weird snack from whatever's in the fridge.
Oh, so I've done that.
I mean,
I,
yeah.
I,
So I have too. I mean, and you look,
I
yeah,
haven't I
there's
have
your
inhabited
goblin.
the mode.
Well, so here's what I do think is interesting about this. It does seem to me that this describes a new nothing new. This does describe a kind of overwhelming ethos that has probably come into its own post COVID.
Mhm.
Because so what happens with COVID initially when it initially hits? We're still, COVID is ongoing, but the restrictions and some of the more severe ramifications, at least here in the United States, this is not the case in China, by the way. where lockdowns are still happening. But here, not all of those restrictions have eased and things have gone back to normal, so to speak. But they haven't gone back to normal. So I remember I was in a debate with somebody I knew back when COVID first started, and I see now that I lost this debate, Nathan.
Hmm.
So
It
this
wasn't me, by the
gentleman
way.
maintained, yes, it was. So it's not Nathan. This gentleman maintained that COVID would change the way we live going forward, that everything would change after COVID. We would not go back to normal. I argued, no, we'll we'll forget about it before you know it. Once the restrictions have eased and once a lot of these, sort of onerous measures are gone and in the past, we'll forget this ever happened. Not I wasn't saying this in some sort of virtuous sense, just meaning no, we're just so
Yeah.
captivated by whatever's in front of us, right?
Hmm.
Yeah, so we'll
Yeah.
just move on and forget it ever happened. I think I'm wrong about that. I do think some and we're it's going to be a long time. I mean, we're going to be parsing a lot of this
Well,
for a
so
long
is
time.
is there a sense in which there's an in between? Let me try to help you be a little bit right. That it might be that in a few years we're not using the phrase COVID, but the cultural changes that happened during that time have fundamentally altered life on the other side of it. So, I mean, are you kind of including that in it as well? Of even if we aren't using the actual phrase, what
Oh,
transpired
absolutely.
was a paradigm shift in human expectations and behavior, with or
I
without a
think
you
so.
in
Well, because I
behavior.
mean, what here's the sociological fact is for a long time, many of us were stuck in our homes. And we were when we started working, we weren't going back to the office, for a while. So we stopped going through the motions of some of the basic ceremonies of professional life for a while because we didn't
Hmm.
have to. Sure, you put on a nice shirt, but you would have boxer shorts on or something like that. There were so
Yeah,
many
for your
jokes
Zoom
about
call.
this.
Yeah.
Right, for your Zoom call. But many people just have not gone back. And
Hmm.
so small rituals that we really didn't think about. For instance, a morning commute. Many people found themselves suddenly unwilling to do an hour-long commute or something like that anymore.
Hmm.
Why would I do that? So, and many places went to sort of permanent remote work. Many people then professional attire became a little bit obsolete. So a lot of people there's an irony here. I'm in jogging pants right now as I as I
I
do
have
this
holes in my
podcast.
jeans. I will admit that the knees are out of my jeans right now.
Right. So I think Goblin Mode has a bearing on this, but there's a darker side to this too. So on the one hand, there's this shifting mindset on, okay, why would we go through all these rituals anymore? They're outdated, they're obsolete. It's not really important. By the way, psychologically and just for your own terms of your own morale, I actually think it is important to
Yeah.
take a shower, make your bed, and dress yourself semi
All
decently.
right,
I really
Jordan
do.
Peterson.
Right, I sound like Jordan
Yeah.
Peterson right now or your dad. But setting that aside, there also seems to be this growing assumption that a lot of this stuff, what's the point anyway? I mean, you
Mhm.
notice wherever you live in the United States, there are help wanted signs in so many service industry jobs.
Oh, yeah.
Many people have not gone back to work either. And there's an underlying what I where I do find some room for alarm here, even with something as goofy sounding as Goblin Mode, is there seems to be an underlying hopelessness to this all. A kind of I mean, the expression, "What's the point?" would sort of capture it a little bit. What's the point of making my bed? What's the point of washing the dishes right now? What's the point of worrying about what I eat? I mean, the other big factor, I'm bringing in too much at once. The other big factor is the unbelievably ridiculous standards set by the social media world and online
Mhm.
influencers and the whole world of giving you this picture perfect kind of mirage of what hey, look how wonderful my life is, look how amazing my vacation is, look how great my work life balance is, look how amazing my hair looks, I work out all the incessantly, I eat so well. I think there's a bit of a reaction to that going on as well, but it's that underlying hopelessness, that what's the point, that concerns me and troubles me here.
So that's one concern. I see your concern and I raise you another, which is that I think if we would look at this from a Christian paradigm, that the inward curl is a temptation that has manifested itself in all sorts of curious ways across the history of humanity. And this self-indulgent language of it is about me and what I do, and I don't care what other people think. There is a certain degree to which I think there's been a helpful sorting in the degree of people saying like, "Why do I care what that person thinks?" That can be healthy. Like you can live under, you know,
Mhm.
a false sense of shame or something because you don't measure up to some standard. On the other hand, to put the focus entirely on yourself is sinful. And COVID gave us the opportunity to have a scientific reason to justify our isolation and our focus on self-care. And so that
Yeah.
sets up an interesting combination of parameters where now we have an excuse. Um, I mean, it uses the word lazy. Some people would have called that sloth in the past. It uses the word
Mhm.
greed. So you see, we're ticking off some of the things that historically would be considered to be deadly
Mhm.
sins or byproducts of capital vices in a way that, oh yeah, but there's a reason for that, and it's because of COVID. And so we sort of have a scientific
Mhm.
justification now for our sinfulness. Um, I'm not making that as like a broad statement of like this is what's going on, but
Mhm.
I can see that the temptation is there and that the door is open for that possibility to become a reality.
You know, another factor that occurs to me here, and this one is a little bit more on the positive side. I think there's a bit of a reaction going on to performativity. The
Hmm.
notion that you always have to be on. And that is something new. I think that is something that I'm going to go ahead and declare genuinely novel, in the sense that in the past there was a more pronounced private space in your average person's life, because in the absence of the online world and social media, there were places where you could get away, and you didn't have to drive far away to do that. You didn't have to take a digital
Hmm.
fast to do it. You could just go to your home, and there were powerful boundaries. Now I know we're in the modern world, and telephones have existed for a long time, and modern modes of communication, and radio and television, all of these are uniquely invasive, yada yada. I get that. But you still had space, and you still had ways to build in boundaries, work life boundaries, boundaries with other people, where you could retreat and rejuvenate. Those spaces, that space is still there, but you have to be very intentional in crafting it and building it into the rhythms of your life. If you don't, you'll find that it's radically diminished. And I think because those private spaces have shrunk so much in recent years, and because a lot of us are not always that intentional about it, and we sort of drift into the normal habits of everyday people in our culture, we find that we're increasingly living our lives out loud, and we always are performing for some audience. And I think that has led to serious fatigue and exhaustion
Yeah. So you're
in many
saying
people.
that Goblin Mode is a reaction to Princess Mode,
Yeah,
where
I
everything is
think it is.
perfect and performative and
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, and
See what I did
obviously
there? I just made up a new word,
you
new
did,
phrase.
and that's the Oxford, I've just gotten word. It's the Oxford Dictionary's word of the year for
Next year.
2023.
Yeah. Okay, so we'll make up a word then for what's the proper balance because you don't want to combat an extreme by going to the extreme in the other direction. So what are the principles then for
Well, back to what you were saying earlier, Nathan. Here's where I find myself a little frustrated, because you know, if you look at our cultural malaise, a growing sense of hopelessness and apathy and indifference, it it's pretty self-evidently the case that more self-indulgence is going to make things worse. I mean,
that will set
it's
you free?
self-indul
Yeah.
right, well, I mean, self-indulgence that has brought us here in the first place. No, I mean, and again, here we you're gonna you there's no way to say some of what we're gonna say here and not sound like a grumpy dad or like Jordan Peterson. But I mean, the notion that you do have to incorporate real discipline into your life, that you really do have to go through some of these rituals that maybe I should be wearing nicer, maybe I shouldn't be wearing sweatpants right now. But because you carry yourself with a dignity and a sense of purpose and a sense of proper ownership and responsibility that allows you to take control over the items in your life that you can take control over. You can't, part of the balance here is, I mean, there is a lot in this world that is out of our hands. And that's not news. But COVID has made it news for many of us modern people who succumbed to the illusion that we were in control. And now
Yeah.
what I fear is that a lot of people have swung to the opposite extreme. Well, gosh, it is truly all out of our hands. And they don't, the takeaway is not, I'm a finite, limited creature. I need to, get move with the grain of the universe and get in touch with reality. It's more, well, so yeah, what's the point? I mean, may as well just indulge and let go. And why would I do the dishes? I mean, after all, everything's out, out of control. And you just kind of want to say, no, 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 no. That's not the conclusion you should be drawing here. You don't, it's
Mhm.
not either I have complete control or all of life is chaos and nothing means anything. No, no, no. We just need to be reacquainted with the basic facts of what it means to be a person,
Okay.
you know?
Yes. So, but here's the strange thing about what it means to be a healthy person is that that person is integrated into life with other persons. And so
Yes.
the trick is, all right, try this phrase on for size, is there is no self-sufficient way to be self-indulgent. And what I mean by that is when you stumble out of bed at 3 in the morning to go get a scoop of ice cream, very few people grew the crops and harvested the crops and fed the cow and milked the cow and separated the cream and made ice cream and then froze the ice cream that then they are, then going to eat as a self-indulgent act.
Mhm.
Um, Maybe two of you listening to this podcast did that. And if so, that's fascinating. But all I'm saying is we don't think about in our self-indulgent when I'm saying self-indulgent here, that you can
Mhm.
only be self-indulgent standing on the shoulders of everybody else who has fabricated the stuff that you're using to be self-indulgent with. And so there is also a degree of my self-indulgence is taking advantage of the people who can't be who aren't. Now, you might say I'm fiscally compensating them, but even so, let's recognize that none of us live in a vacuum. Even in COVID era, there were a lot of people shipping stuff in boxes and driving trucks and running things and doing the day-to-day things that kept the lights on, um, and Amazon going. So, just I think a little bit of awareness there that our self-indulgence only works within a very narrow scope of time because the crumbs will build up in your bed and somebody had to make the snack that you were eating. So, once you broaden the horizons of perspective out there a little bit, I think as you said, we can see that this is a self-defeating um, goal in life. Although, moments of fun and pleasure and those are good things too, but we want that to be the exception, not the natural posture of our heart.
Right, and that was a big part of the discussion during COVID because suddenly when supply chains were affected, and by the way, we're gonna be dealing with the fallout from that for many years to come. Just talk to anybody who's working in development or in the construction business. Shortages continue, but that
Oh
was a
yeah,
big,
I mean there are even stores that don't have their full hours still because they can't find
right.
people to work the. I mean, all of us
Yep.
have experienced that.
Well, yeah, so that's where the a French thinker who've just lost, which is, it's pretty sad. I think he was only 71, 72. Bruno Latour, probably most famous for "We Were Never Modern," but he pointed out that COVID essentially has demonstrated the incredible fragility of the whole modern illusion that we have this great fail-safe economic system, and all of that was so profoundly disrupted here, and so we're still dealing with that. But one of the the phrases, this could have been an Oxford Dictionary word of the year, essential worker. I mean, that came to have a very unique place in the discourse for a
Hmm.
while, didn't it?
Yeah.
Because I mean, while everybody else was staying at home and complaining about their Zoom calls, these people, when very few facts were known about COVID, had to just, I mean, didn't have the luxury of staying at home, had to continue venturing out so that we could continue our consumer habits and keep those packages flowing, keep those grocery stores stocked with all the ice cream that we needed when we were in full goblin mode. So, absolutely, to think of ourself as relational creatures is something that we can't afford to not do that,
I
and we
I
we
also
keep slipping back to that habit.
on a total rabbit trail. I still can't help but giggle every time you say famous and a philosopher together. That just makes me happy. It's like pedagogically, every quote famous philosopher that Cameron knows really should attach themselves to a band. So if Bruno Latour could have been, the lyric writer for some, uh, really get those ideas out there. Uh,
Yeah, right. Yeah, well, yeah. Fame is always a kind of a relative thing, but in certain circles, yeah, Bruno
that's right.
Latour
Oh,
is
no.
really big in English departments. I'm just kidding.
Hey, by the way, I saw that this year English, philosophy, history, and there was one other literature combined made up 4% of college majors.
Oh wow, I
Yeah.
had not heard
So
that.
so I'm just saying that if you are famous in English departments, that is a small slice of the pie these days.
It is.
Somebody
Yes,
should
it
fact
really
check
is.
that. I read it somewhere on the internet, so it has to be true. But
It does.
all that to say. Anyway, we're way off topic now. Back to Goblin Mode.
Back to goblin mode. Well, and also, I mean, again, total self-indulgence is a recipe for loneliness, alienation, poor self-esteem. I mean, so many of the social ills that are rampant right now because it's again, you're trying to fight against hopelessness by feeding it, essentially is what you're doing.
Yeah, I don't know
Because
if
then
this
you're
fit
yeah, with your yeah.
I don't know if this fits in there or not, but you're talking about how it's a reaction against like the what I called princess mode, like everything is great. Um, and so my grandpa used to always say, he's like, when young people are dating, he's like, they do it all wrong. He's like, you go to a party or something, you go have this big time, but then you're depressed because all the rest of life isn't like that. It's a letdown compared to the exciting thing that was. He's like, if you really wanted to be strategic about it, if you're a young person, he's like, you should go on a date to a nursing home. He's like, spend the afternoon talking to old people who have life experience and are in wheelchair bound and have trouble eating. And he's like, and the rest of your week will seem phenomenal. Um, where
Get some
like,
perspective.
yeah, get some perspective on how the world really works, and then the comparative element there. So perhaps there is a bit of a sense of like the focus on self always leads to a letdown. However, in the odd emotional stability economy of the world, that service and a genuine interest in the lives of other people does often lead to, or does always lead to, a general sense of well being and joy in life that you don't get by just navel gazing.
Well, let me just put a few facts out there. Let's say you look at your week and you think, all right, what's the point of a lot of this? So your house is a total wreck. The dishes sit unwashed, filled with water in your sink. You eat whatever you want and you eat too much of it,
Straight out
which
of the
makes you feel
container, though. You don't put it on a
straight
plate,
out of the
Cameron.
container.
Yeah.
Not on a plate, yeah, because yeah, who wants to dirty up more dishes? So you feel lethargic and tired all the time. You just walk around in the same thing that you've been wearing the whole week because why bother? You sleep whenever you want. You watch pretty much whatever you want. You binge watch shows. You don't talk to too many people because you're not that presentable. It's hard to schedule. It's hard to also, I mean, getting together with people requires planning. That's a little bit tiresome. You've let your gym membership slide. You know you probably ought to, but you don't. And now you complain about the fact that you feel depressed and you don't have a sense of purpose or meaning in your life. It's a strange, I mean, if we just say our habits out loud and then describe, you know, our maladies, a little bit of clarity enters into the equation. We realize, wow, this actually has a much simpler solution than some of the elaborate. I mean, is it good to talk to somebody sometimes? You know, maybe a professional healthcare worker, and all, of course. But are there some basic habits and items in your life that could be addressed that would greatly boost your morale and help you to walk with more of a sense of purpose? Yes, absolutely. I mean, I always think about a story along these lines that, you know, resonates with me because I'm a writer. I like writers, was John Cheever, novelist and great short story writer, worked from home, wrote from home. I mean, that was his life. He made his living as a writer, something that's exceedingly difficult to do these days, but he did it. And he would put on a suit and tie and a jacket every day and, you know, walk down the stairs and go into his study in the home and write because it gave him that sense of purpose as he was,
Mhm.
and it just sort of in his mind solidified, I'm doing a real job here.
Yeah.
And I think there's some wisdom there.
So, did you just outline for us the antidote to Goblin Mode? Or yeah, so I mean, how then do we live in a world where that is the word of the year?
Yeah, I mean, part of what sets Christians apart in our cultural moment, I mean, the distinctiveness of Christians is in some ways there are some distinctive features of being belonging to Christ and following him that are timeless, and then there are some that are timely and that stand out in your particular
Mhm.
cultural moment. Right now, two that come to mind repeatedly for me in our cultural moment is a sense of the peace of Christ, because let's face it, this is a time where a lot of people are profoundly agitated and anxious at the very least. Some people are just downright scared. So that peaceableness and that peace in one's heart, that calmness, that stability, but then I think the other one is going to be a sense of purpose, a spring in one's step, a sense of a very clear direction in which we are moving.
Mhm.
Because again, we talked about this on the last podcast, but one of the great, very harmful background assumptions of our age is that human life is devoid of intrinsic purpose and meaning. And that might sound real romantic and freeing at first. I can do whatever I want. But then, of course, the terrible existential question becomes, well, what the heck do I want to do in the first place? And
Mhm.
people are just tearing themselves apart, trying to figure out what it is they want to do, what it is they want to be. And they keep trying different things, and none of them work. So Christians who have I think part of what we want to do is allow our sense of the peace in our hearts and the sense of the purpose with which we live our lives to invite people in.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's always going to be direct questions at first. It might just be. I mean, I'm finding at least in my own, my wife and I are finding often that people are simply attracted to the dynamics of our family, and
Mhm.
a lot of the questions have to do with our marriage, actually, and our family and our relationships, and but just a sense of happiness and holisticness and contentment. Now, we are by no means a perfect family. I mean, we've got our share of anxieties and agitation, of course, we're human beings, but there is a distinctiveness there, and I think that's what comes to mind for me when I think about, Christians living in a world dominated by goblin mode.
In the mythological world, I can't get oh, the Princess and Curdie, George MacDonald. I can't that's like my default goblin um creature. What's the opposite of a goblin in mythology, like that realm? What's the other?
The opposite of the goblin.
Yeah,
The
I mean, so
troll,
no, that's too dark.
ogre,
Too dark.
not sure.
No. Yeah. So I
One of our
mean, so
listeners will have it.
so yes, somebody who's better read in these things. I guess there's a sense of mischievousness of someone who lives in the shadows in the underworld. Usually,
Oh,
crawls out at night.
yeah.
Is nocturnal.
Mhm.
Um,
Sprites and hobgoblins.
Hobgoblins. There you go. Yeah. I still haven't come up with what I feel is an
Fairies
accurate image of what it is that I want to be. Like what I want to be is just in such a different category that it doesn't have a corollary or corresponding
in the
al-
mythological world.
yeah,
Mhm.
allegory or analogy to a goblin. So I'm a little bit of a loss of like for me it's easy not to do
Oh,
that.
well, I can help you out here a little bit. It's a different
What a
I mean, we're
relief.
gosh, we're traipsing all over mythological territory here and probably making a mess of things, but I mean, one might consider a knight, right? In the
Okay.
tradition
Yeah.
of chivalry, but you have a high level of purpose, you have a very high code of honor, high code of
Structure,
ethics.
order.
You have a very order. And another example would be, and this is, I mean, obviously a descendant of the knight, but would be the samurai from
Mhm.
Japan. Again, strict code of ethics, strict code of honor that binds you to a particular lord, usually, or to protect a particular lord or a group of people, even if there's very little reward connected with it. I think I'm choosing these examples because they have a high degree of purpose connected to them,
Yeah,
and
so
these are obviously both warrior pictures, but
yeah, I
yeah,
think that's helpful because you don't become a knight by accident. So,
right, right.
but you can become a
You're
goblin by
set apart.
doing you can become a goblin by doing nothing.
There you go. Yeah, yeah,
So,
yeah.
one
So
is an
you're talking about
intentionality,
purpose
it's a
and
vision, a goal, an order, a training. I want to do something or become more like something that requires
mhm.
intentionality on my part. But the good news of the Christian message is that not all of the intentionality and the willpower comes from you, that there's help from the outside.
No,
You
right.
know, so that's the difference here. I think a goblin mode is a spiritually devoid mode, which comes from the helplessness that you talked about earlier, but it also points to our inability to respond to that which is wanting to help us that transcends us as well.
You can mutate into goblin mode, but I think Nathan, just to end it on a somewhat subversive note,
Yeah, I can't wait for
I'm
this.
un
Please
well, I'm
do end this.
uncomfortable with both.
Put us out
I'm
of our misery.
uncomfortable. Well, I'm uncomfortable with the knight, and I'm uncomfortable with the samurai. As captivating as I do find the stories, and because the association here is martial, warfare,
Mhm.
bloodshed. And I think, martial language is not foreign to scripture, but bloodshed ultimately, when you have the full vision when you consider the full scope of the narrative of scripture, it's a vision and a story that takes you beyond bloodshed and offers you a
Mhm.
greater hope. So I think the real picture that I would like to look at for us would be the priest, right? And if you
Ooh,
look at the yeah,
so
I mean,
I
I
had
think
another
that's
one
our
in my mind
picture.
where I thought you were going, but let's hear it.
No, well, yeah, and I wanna hear you then, but, I mean, basically just a royal priesthood set apart, and it's the set apart language that I think is so important because, I mean, and even if you look at the ceremonies surrounding, you know, the Levitical priesthood, for instance, and Aaron, you see that these people are set apart and their lives are consecrated to bring glory to God and
Mhm.
as vessels of mercy. And that is a picture of Christians. It has a high degree of purpose, but this is, as you pointed out, this is a purpose that is conferred on us by our Lord.
Yeah.
It's not intrinsic to us. It is given to us as a gift, and we steward that gift. So I think that's the image I would actually
Yeah.
prefer. But yeah,
All right.
I would
I've
love to
got
hear your
one.
thoughts there.
I've got
All right.
my alternative now because the alliteration helps. What about a gardener? The opposite of a goblin is
Oh,
a
there you
gardener.
go.
Because it has, you mean the two G's, it just goes together. Somebody should write an article quick. Um, that there's an ordering that comes from there. It's working in the light. It's stewarding and
Mhm.
organizing and bringing to fruition growth and health and someone else's vision often. And I see that very early on in my theology of what God had intended for people to be up to and doing. So the priest relationship with God, the gardener relationship with people and the world around us. I think those are good images that we get from scripture that help us mitigate against our goblin esque tendencies, but also
Mhm.
leave a lot of room for holistic joy and pleasure and I think
Mhm.
ice cream is part of being a Christian. So we don't
Oh,
want to
yeah.
downplay joy and pleasure and rest either. So anyway, I don't know what anybody will take out of this, but I've enjoyed talking to you about this, and I'm sure we'll have some funny references back to this at some point in the future. If any of you have made
Oh,
more sense of
likewise.
this than we can, please let us know. You've been listening to Thinking Out Loud, a podcast where we think out loud about current events, current words, and Christian hope.
Thanks for listening to Thinking Out Loud. If you'd like to learn more about what we do, book Nathan or Cameron, or if you'd like to support us financially, whether through a one-time donation or on a monthly basis, you can do so on the donate page at www.toltogether.com. That's toltogether.com. And please consider leaving us a 5-star rating and sharing this content with your friends. It really does help.